watch, and let's get started on this last course that you have. First of all, I want to say thank you guys for tuning in last week, and also here you are again in regards to having a class last night and then here. Let me just tell you up front is that I was kind of surprised too, which I think many of you were when you got my email, said, hey, we're having a go-to-meeting last week. But as you may know, NGS no longer has an academic department. They closed down on the 31st of January, but I did get a schedule that says, hey, we start on the 1st. And so I kind of got a light word that I was changing. And also we had additional members coming in. So I wanted to welcome the new members and let you also know who other faces were going to be in here. And particularly, if you've been reading my posts to the announcements and also into the emails, this is not a 4-week course. It's 13 days by our schedule, which is, for most of you, you're used to that pace. You may have not looked at it, but it's really going to be truncated. And one of the things I'm going to talk about tonight, because originally this the portal was for a 4-week course, it's going to be 13 days is what we currently have. So in addition to that, reducing the requirements in order for you to be clearly focused on the most important deliverables. And I'll talk about that with you tonight. And it's going to be a short session tonight. I will emphasize, talk a little bit up front about the assignments and what we need to do to be successful for completing your degree program as well as 566. And then also cover the phase that we really haven't given you much instruction to date with, and that is the closure and also the control phase that comes in with your project. So I'm going to cover those tonight. It's going to be a short session. We're going to focus on your master business processes and really want you to put your weight into that and do an excellent job. But as I mentioned last week, what's really important is that you get to the champions if you haven't already, and hopefully you've been able to do some scheduling and then have a briefing to your champion and be able then to get that feedback and include it in your final presentation. So at a very high level, I'm going to cover it through the slides, but let me ask, anybody have any questions before we get into what I have here on the slide deck? And by the way, just before class started, I emailed the updated version of the presentation, which I've inserted clarification about the assignments and also my schedule. And let me tell you up front, no one is late with any assignment. There are, I'll cover the due dates for this. So the pre-work, which was alluded to, which was individual assessment. So everybody you did provide that, that's appreciate that. You certainly get credit for that. But you're really the first set of assignments I'm going to talk about tonight. So and I wanted to be able to talk to you about it so you have clarity before we launch into it because of the gyrations we've had with abbreviated course and the schedule kind of being challenged. So let me ask, anybody have any questions that you want to ask me before we dive in? All right. Send me a note if you do, and I'll try to go. Here's what we're going to be covering. And for your, hopefully you see this on your screens. Everybody can see the first slide. Is that, as I mentioned, for those who just joined us, this is going to be the last webinar. I will send you for your mentoring sessions for the next 2 that you be scheduled, a separate GoToMeeting invite. But basically, there is 2 things. One, you're bringing closure to your project, but you're also kind of having your final. And your final is the cumulative oral brief. We don't do an NGS, a big thesis, though we used to have, a long time ago, teams would actually write up executive summaries of their project, and it would be, you know, about 20 pages. And they did away with that. And one of the reasons is that the competencies of a quality professional often are more oral than they are written. In other words, at least in my experience, I almost present all of my findings. I'm always, interacting with the organization or champion. It's usually a PowerPoint presentation or a briefing where we're having to orally provide our findings. At least in my history, it's very rare, and though I've done a lot of studies, but most of it is in this forum where you're communicating. And so that is one of the reasons that they've had, this is that you have capability to present your project in a way that is in a team format. And so the oral briefings and the written portions of this, they'll be augmenting, and as in the case of with Matthew, is that's what we're looking for, is a comprehensive presentation covering from the very beginning of your projects to where you are now. So, and my job is then also at the end of this is whether determine you meet the standards of understanding the quality concepts and meet the requirements back to the school. So basically the final brief is one that where we evaluate that. So I'm looking for your academic content, not only how well you did in your project, where you got ROIs and results, but whether you understand the tools and can use them in a way that is appropriate. At one time, we used to have 3 faculty members, senior members, where we would do basically the teams would brief the faculty members, and then we would get together and then evaluate that. And actually, the checklist that's in the portal, which we're not going to be using for this course, was one that the faculty had used. And I think if you looked at the checklist and how that was evaluated, without explanation, it may be not necessarily self-explanatory. So there is, that's one of the requirements that we're not going to be doing, but and it's a little bit about the history that we used to have a faculty do a peer review, listen to the projects, but now the school basically is invested in the lead faculty that ability to review that. So if I think you haven't, or the team isn't at the point where you meet satisfactory requirements for the content, we'll go over what you have to have for requirements in this and what we'll be looking for again tonight. Then we're going to go through it again until you get it right. I want to be sure that you're successful. And so I'll tell you, if I think in mentoring session 1 where you are, what your strengths and weaknesses are perhaps that to work. And then in the final brief, I'll just sit back, and as we've done in Master Business Process 2, you'll just team and go through your entire project, and I'll listen quietly for about 30 minutes, and then you'll provide then your self-critique, and I'll give you my feedback to you, reference that. So that is what our focus is, and you've seen these before. We are now at the end. Again, here's another way to use the DMAIC model. And this way we kind of show this is where we are. And I recommend it to some of you too. It's a really good briefing technique. Even when you go back to your champion, when you brief that chart on the DMAIC, you just show them, hey, we are at this phase. It just allows everybody to kind of fully understand where you are. So we're at the end of that. And there often is, if you look at that bottom left-hand box, it says R, DMAIC R. So you define, measure, analyze, improve, control, and results. And so in your briefing, you should have these results. In other words, what did we actually occur? What did we achieve? What measurable return on investments, financial improvement in the processes, what's the anticipated tangible and intangible results? So those things will be included in that. And a lot of times you'll see, even in DMAIC, you'll have DMAIC R. So that's where we are focused on. And this also is important. I think probably one of the things that is bringing this project to closure is something that occurs, well, many of you who own this as a sponsoring student, well, you continue to work it. But for a lot of organizations, closure means that you're turning this project over to somebody else in the organization, or maybe to a client. Like I do this for hire, and when I finish out a project, often I'm turning it over back to the members of the organization, our charts, our findings, and they're picking up the activities that are being recommended in our improvement phase. And so part of that closure, we'll talk about that, Many of you are internal to the organization, and so you're going to be picking up that role, but we'll talk about how the project management phase of closure pertains to this. And the monitoring control is a little different than the MAIC control, because in the control that we'll define here and we'll cover tonight is basically how are you going to review this project? What are the metrics? What's the review process? And in monitoring and control in the project management, it is something that's done actually during the process execution while you're going through the whole thing. And now we're coming, so there's a little bit of a difference, even though they have control in both of those two phases. What it means in the MAIC is a little bit different than what it means in the project management. And so we'll talk about that at this point with the control phases and what you need to have as slides. So, and if any of you have any questions, again, particularly for the new members joining in, if you just shoot me a chat. If you got something, I'll take a look at it, or just type in and go from there. Because I like to have interchange as we go through. Again, we're going to bring all these things together. All these activities now are going to be integrated, and that's, as I've mentioned to you before, don't tell your briefing as short stories. I mean, it's not each one of you briefing a separate portion of your presentation. It's all of you briefing your team story. And so the integration of your, how does this chart then will be briefed by so-and-so? How does this tool, how did we address the customer requirements we have in our CRM, in our recommendations, for instance, is how you're starting to relate the tools, the slides, the work you did together as an integrated thing. And we're also looking that you've kind of learned from this. And I mentioned to the team last night, and I think it's very important when you do your briefing, if you also can weave into your narrative what you learned as a team, as individuals. Hey, we did this problem statement, we did it like 10 times, right? Well, after we collected some data, but here's maybe what we learned from that, maybe whatever that was, or if you had insights as you went through that, you as a team or such, it's good for you to weave that in there, because again, my job is to evaluate whether you learn things throughout this degree. And so, and I also find it in the professional life, it's very good, effective briefing technique, because it allows the champion to, say, hey, we talked to your people. It was amazing when we did this process map, for instance. They learned a lot from it. They said they learned from each other when they listened to each other, how they had a different view of the process. And so I often, in my briefings back to the champion, also integrate that story about what his or her people did and what they learned, and what us as a team perhaps developed new insights. And that's just part of selling this set of recommendations, of telling the story of your project. And so that's kind of what we're looking for. Your team dynamic is one of the things in the actual evaluations. We're asking, how did you do? I will know pretty well, actually, when we get together and do our mentoring session, how well you're doing as a team. I can judge by your results, but also the other things that are very important at this point is that you are really at the point where your results speak for your team success. And so that is the other component that we're interested in, is that you learn things as you group as a team. Same methodology we've had before, and for the folks who are joining us, I think it's not too dissimilar from what Professor Kowalczyk had used, is that we'll focus on the tailored feedback with the mentoring sessions. And then, as I mentioned, this is really a go, no go. And I'll let you know if I think you're deficient in that area. Now, this is a new slide. This is the new slide deck that I've added to what I've been trying to add to you, maybe a little piecemeal, but in my post, in my email to you, and I realized that you guys are focused on finishing up this last course. So here's the reduction, okay? In the portal initially was set up for 4 weeks. As I said, we got 13 days. There's going to be just 2 actual content DQs, discussion questions, and those 2 will be opened up on, for your initial replies. Some you've already started on it. In week 1, okay, which will actually be this Sunday, and then you should put the second response by next Wednesday, Okay, so there's 2 discussion questions. There's a third one, and it's going to be in the area where it has weeks 3 and 4. And that basically is going to be an optional discussion question, where if you want to put reflections about what you've learned from this degree program, maybe the value that you might see in your work, anything else you would like to have in there that you may want to share with your fellow students, maybe your team dynamics, whatever that might be. I would ask if you got particular things that if you would like to constructive criticism or feedback, contact me directly and let me take that. And I'll be glad to do that. Good feedback. The DQ though is really, this last one's an optional one. It's not going to be graded. It's up to you if you would like to provide that, but there will be a DQ for that. All the rest, and it's a little challenging in the course material because they're intertwined with the weeks, but basically you do not have to do any other than this first 2 this first week, and then that last one, which is an optional one. Reason being, I really, really want you to focus on the beef, and that is getting your presentations, practicing that, get it down right, and spending all your energies making the most professional presentation you possibly can. And as I tell every team, this presentation should be a source of pride. It is a year of your work, and I think every one of you is going to have that capability to have something you'll reflect back on. So on the discussion questions, that's the change. I mentioned in the evaluations, there's an evaluation that is set up for Excel and in there. If you want to use that as a team, that is fine. That is what's designed. But I will tell you, probably at this point, will be more helpful for me is that instead of doing that Excel, you can do the Excel, but it's not required. What I would like for you to do as a team, and I find this, other NGS teams have found this valuable, at this point, they just go through the presentation and look at that Microsoft document that lays out what slides and information and requirements that you need to have. Okay, if you take your presentation, your slides, and then insert in there, hey, we're still working on this. We don't have closure yet on this particular slide, or we need guidance in this for when we have our mentoring session, and then maybe insert a comment about things that you're struggling with into the slide. That will substitute for that evaluation using the Excel. And then we could probably even use that unless there's going to be major changes for your first mentoring session. If you need to talk through something, and this, because it focuses right back on your deliverables. So if you want to do that, instead of doing the Excel, which was in there, at this point, I am also trying to figure out how much and who I queue up first in the mentoring sessions. And for some teams say, hey, we really need some assistance, I'll try to move you guys maybe to the front of the queue. And so that's the other purpose, in addition to meeting the academic requirement. So if you, where it says team self-evaluation, if you wanted to send your slide deck with those comments inserted in slides, that would be the substitute for the evaluation. So, any questions about that? Does that make sense to you? Okay. And so what I would like, before we do our mentoring session, by the way, before we get our first mentoring session with you as a team, I would like to have that slide deck, you know, the ones you can have. And if there's any comments and things you're still working on, so I can take a look at it, so I know where we can, because we got a lot of slides, and I want to kind of be sure we use our time well in the mentoring session. So it has it due in week 2, which would be Wednesday, but we'll talk about the schedule here in a second. I would like to see that slide deck as soon as you can get it. If you have it already, you kind of know I've looked at it. Hopefully you have. Then send that to me. And then the individual evaluations, which was pre-work for this course, I think about 5 of you have already done that. And so that is one of the other changes. Those are optional. You'll get credit for those who've submitted. Appreciate that. And the last comment, there was also previously, I think, associated with the syllabus, talked about an MBP checklist. No requirement to do that. That was, it asked, like, do you have scope? Is it doable? Well, you're way beyond that right now. So that's no longer a requirement. That's one of the things we're going to delete because we're now on a 13-day schedule versus a month schedule. Okay. Oh, so those changes and requirements. Let me just show you the schedule quickly. And so what this is, this gives you a reduction here. And let me just talk about the schedule. And then I would like to see if we can set up the first sessions between now and next week, Thursday. That gives you a little bit of time to do this preparation to get the first mentoring sessions. Informal discussion, we're scheduled for about an hour. We already had one team last night from the previous cohort. So I'm going to be available at just about every weekend during the week, evenings from about 6:30 or so. That's when I get in at the very latest, ride the the DC traffic allows me to get home. And I can schedule things all the way up to about 9 o'clock, because the last session we start at 9, we end at 10, and if you're like me, you guys got other things on your plate, and about 10 o'clock, there ain't a lot of juice left. So I won't start too much later than 9 o'clock for that session, but I'll be available Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If you want to do it Friday, can, and also on the weekend. That's not my high preference, but we'll be able to do that if it works for your schedule as a team. Once you get your briefing, and my recommendation, unless you've already done it, and some of you, because your champion's going to be leaving, maybe you have tried to schedule that already. I tried to give you a heads up last week that's important. But typically teams, after we do our first mentoring session, we'll go back and tinker and refine their presentation. They go back to the champions, get their feedback, and then that has to be done before we get back together for me to listen to your final brief. So after we have our mentoring session, typically teams go brief their champions, get their feedback, and then include that into their presentation and into the tracker. There's a form that you have to have in there, and I'll show you that in a moment. But basically, the class is scheduled to end on March 21st. There may be some for makeups and alibis on the 22nd and 23rd, but grading, I need to have it in that following weekend for the school's requirements. And so we're on a short fuse. I know that's why I try to give you a heads up about the briefing. If there's any challenges to getting to the champion on that, then maybe we can talk about it after this session. And again, here's my schedule on that. I'll send each team a GoToMeeting invite for the sessions that you'll have. It'll be distinct and used only for that one session. And if anybody wants to have more discussion or get together on certain about something, or we have one mentoring session, you guys are just really need a third one in addition to these two, I'd be glad to do so. Okay, that's changes in requirement. Any questions on that?
Not at this time, sir.
Thanks, David. And if you do, I'll be glad to hang on after I let the classes go, and maybe if you think about it, be glad to talk to you individually afterwards. 30-minute brief. It's very short. Again, that requires you to be very concise, to think about the takeaways. I heartily recommend, some of you in Master Business Process 2 went far over the time. The requirement is for you to be concise, to know what you need to talk about, introduce the slide, talk a little bit about the purpose of the slide, but talk about the content. And your slides should be self-explanatory. In other words, whoever looks at it, you can understand without necessarily being briefed what it should say. So timing is very important, okay? I am looking for that. And then also, it says this feedback here. Let me switch screens for a second. I'm going to show you the form if you guys haven't seen it yet. Okay. And let's see. I'm not sure if is this popping up on you. Waiting for screen. Okay. You're not getting anything on your side yet, are you?
No, I'm not seeing anything.
Yeah, that's because
There it
go
is.
to meet. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's the wrong one though. Sometimes GoToMeeting is just plain evil. Here's the form. They like to torture me at least once a week. So here is the form that I want you guys and school requires to fill out. The senior champion doesn't have to be the day-to-day, but if they want to add comments, that's fine. But the requirement is whoever your senior champion is, they can put comments back, whether they accepted your briefing. They can be just as that. I accepted the briefing. Sometimes they'll put in there and say, with the exception that I need to review recommendation 2 and 3, we're going to do more staffing on that. That type of thing. They sometimes will, put in comments, a great team, very professional, excellent results. Whatever that is, the verbiage from the champion, you need to get it in writing with their signature, okay, and the date on it. So be sure this gets in front of your champion after you do your briefing. And this will be uploaded into the tracker. This is a required document for your graduation. Now, what you should do then is that whatever verbal comments, maybe even things they put in actually in writing, if you want to summarize that and then put that into your slide, that's part of your results, whether your champion actually accepted your results. And so that is one of the requirements that we'll be looking for, is the feedback in both the slide format, the summary, and then in this one. So that's one thing that you're absolutely important for you to know and to achieve. All right. And let me show you the other one that I talked about, the other Microsoft document. This is the template that of required slides. You can adjust the format, which sequence, if you want to do that a little differently based on your briefing style, so be it. But this document outlines what information on the slides that need to be in your presentation. So you should go take a look at your presentation, review it against this, and say, do we have all of this? Now, where one area a lot of teams kind of get messed up on, they like data collection plan. And that's all they read is the big bold letters, right? Okay, what you need to read on the other thing is whatever supports that data collection. It says like survey or interview, the radar charts, if you did a value stream map, which you probably should, or talk times, Getty diagram, results from your survey, that would be in behind that data collection plan. So the data collection plan, some teams say, oh, that's what they want. But if you read the fine print to the right, which is not so fine, it's actually regular font, it says examples of the data that's in behind that. So be sure your presentation has that. And some of you may have put that into your backup slides. Here's some charts we did. But the amount of data which you have in there is going to be up to you. These are at the minimum. If you want to add other things in there, that's fine. But I want you to take a look at your slide deck, after you kind of go through this, and some of you will have around 30, maybe 40 slides. Do the math, 30 minutes. Okay, that means, some slides you may spend 10 or 15 seconds on, and others, which are more meaty, you might spend maybe a couple of minutes on. But that time management about the number of slides you have and what's key, and if you got anybody in the group that just loves to talk, right, just like to go on and on about stuff, this is where the team part comes in. You need to police each other up and listen to each other and practice and be sure that you're on time, because you don't want to be burning your time in covering a slide or two and doing it very well and very deep, but not get to the rest of your meat of your project by the time of 30 minutes. This is, again, take a look at that. It also talks about, if they're saying corresponding in the tracker, that's probably not a big item for you at this point. But these are the things that are required. Root cause analysis, this could be the 5 whys, or it can be, if you did a failure mode analysis, or if you want to put in their narrative about what you thought the root causes were, that's fine. So cost analysis, you had a financial class. If you notice, the class that you just finished, the course you just finished, doesn't have much in here, the supplier. And that's because sometimes this has great pertinence to some organizations, and others may be not so. So there is actually, in this case, nothing is required, but you may want to include it if you so desire. And the ROI is important because that's part of the school requirement. Okay. Payback time, I think you should probably develop that. Monitoring control is what we're going to talk about tonight. Intangible, tangible results. And then these lessons learned, review comments, and then whatever backup that you'd like to have. All right, so that's what you need to look at. If you're missing any of this, you're still a process in work. You're going to go through. Hey, we're still working on the process future state. We thought about something we want to add to that. You know, here's the recommendations we've got. We're going to frame it up a little differently. If you want to put that into your slide deck for mentoring one, and then say, here's what we're thinking about, and you want my feedback on it, I'd be glad to do that. So that's what I mean when you use this as a checklist. Look at your MVP and see if you got everything. All right. Any questions or comments about that? Let me get back to the slide deck. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you a quick high level and talk about where we are. I mentioned you're in control, but a lot of you are still maybe finishing up your analysis. Keep in mind, your problem statement is the reason you are here. The reason that's the whole foundation of your project. And you need to be able to reflect back to that. In other words, you come up and you brief your problem statement at the very beginning and say, okay, here's what we started to do. We have X amount of defects. We have this amount of cost being hemorrhaging. We have, X, Y, Z. You need to bring that back around when you talk about your results. You need to come back and say, how did you solve that problem statement? What was the results that you increased? Did we decrease the cost, increase the quality? Did we decrease the time? So be sure you reflect back on when you do your results brief. And some teams, as I mentioned, even what they do is, even though it's not in the slide deck, as that you have to put it in there twice, but it's a technique. They make a copy of the problem statement, and they put it back in results when they brief that and said, okay, here's what we achieved, just to remind the audience, that you achieved the goal. Okay. And it talks about recommendations. If you remember back in the Master Business Process 2, a lot of times, I think most of the slides that I've seen so far, you just put in recommendations. Here's our recommendations for improvement. But if you think about it, reflect on what you see on your screen, this is actually a little bit more mature approach. It not only has your recommendations, it basically framed them as alternatives. We are recommending 2 alternatives. This is from this team. Alternative 1 is our recommendations, and they said, here's the pros and cons of doing this alternative, this recommendation. Okay. And we give you alternative 2, which is a different recommendation. Okay. And the pros and cons of that, as you can see here, right? Pros and cons. And then what they simply did was color code with the team recommendation back to the champion. Okay. We gave you 2 alternatives to consider. Here's the good and here's the bad about each. And we as a team are recommending to you, boss, this one here in the light green. So that is a little bit more mature approach in providing recommendations. It's just not giving them, and if you think about that, if you have more than one way to do something and you are undecided as a team, but you want to present both of them for the champion's consideration, this is a technique. And that's one of the things I want to highlight. I think most of the teams I've seen so far, and it's been my history with the NGS teams, they usually just throw in recommendations. We're recommending do this and do that, but they really don't spell out the advantages and disadvantages or even talk about alternatives. But you want to go that, A+ range, of course, there isn't such great in NGS, but in life there is. It's called getting rehired or getting promoted or being better than before. And that this is one way you polish up your presentation, is providing a little bit more than just simple recommendations, but rather ones that allow consideration of alternatives. Okay, and then you get potential solutions, project management. These things were already in there. We talked about that, so I'm not going to dwell on it. Now, when you give your recommendations to somebody, hey, you need to go fix this process, right? You need to do some training. You need to do, take and implement these checklists. Okay. Well, what you should do, and all the recommendations you have, because you think about it, you're getting all the recommendations from your tools that you've been using. And when you did your process map, you found redundancies, or this step took a lot of time, and you have recommendations to improve that process. We're going to implement a check sheet, or we're going to eliminate that step altogether, or we're going to recommend we implement something from our benchmarking findings. Okay, hey, we found a really neat template another organization's using. We think that has good value for us. That's something we think we do. Or you go through and did your value stream map, and you got those things. So you got your process analysis, you got your root cause analysis, you got your benchmarking findings. And what you're doing now is saying, okay, we're going to provide you all these recommendations. Okay. And typically what you do is then, well, what's the implementation plan of that? Are some of these short-term and some of them are longer-term? Are they measurable? In other words, once we implement this checklist, what will be the measurement? And this gets us into a control phase. How will we know if we implement that, what's the benefit of that? Well, hey, maybe we'll just talk to the users and we got feedback, they like it. On a scale of 1 to 5, they just told us this is like a 4.5, made their life a lot easier. Or we measured it, by looking at, did it actually decrease the number of defects? So you kind of think about this in your recommendations. When should they be executed, your recommendations? Are they short-term, long-term? What's the time frame? Who's the rose pinned on? That's the other thing that often goes into control phase, is who do you recommend, reviews this, but not only review it, but does it? And so if you think about your recommendations, a lot of times people say, hey, we recommend we do training. Well, who's going to design the training? Is that something that needs to be done next 90 days? Is this something that needs to be developed? So you just kind of think it through, and often you do kind of like an action plan. The SMART is a pretty good format. It makes you think through these things. What am I going to tell you? And giving them sufficient detail that they can implement this without further staffing or with limited staffing. So the idea of using SMART on your recommendations, and think about it, are you being specific? How will you might be able to measure what you recommend? And be sure to include visuals in there. And some of you are done a great job on this. You went back to the process map, the as-is that you used maybe in the measure phase, and then said, okay, here's our recommendation. Here's what it looked like before, right? Here on the left, here's what we're recommending on the right. And it's very clear then what's the difference between what it used to be before we started and what it's going to be based if you take our recommendations, or maybe we already have implemented these. And you just summarize the benefits, okay? We reduced 4 non-value added steps. We improved the lead time by 30%. We went from spending 100 labor hours to 70 hours. And so you not only show the differences in the graphical visual, because quality is often visual tools, you'll also just said, here's the bottom line benefit of that. So if you kind of look at that other chart, where you have the light green on it, what you're doing here and saying, okay, here's the advantages, okay, of doing this. So you're kind of taking that portion of that chart and saying, okay, summarizing it. So sometimes you do it side by side, or maybe this is one slide, here's the present state. So let me show you what the future state is based on our recommendation. And be sure that you kind of summarize this in a very concise, clear way of what the benefits are of your recommendations. A lot of teams don't do that well. They kind of fuzzy about it. what's the real benefit by implementing these checklists? Well, we were able to decrease this by, we tripled our rate, whatever that might be. But be sure you put that on your slide and not just in your narrative, so the impact, the benefits are very clear and documented so everybody looks at that. Okay. As I mentioned on top, this chart here, this is distinct from this stuff that's beneath here. But if you take that SMART and say, here's our recommendation, who's going to be responsible, here's the time frame we think that you should be implemented. This is often a very good format for your recommendations. Here's our recommendations, responsible, time frame. There's a lot of different action planning formats. This is just one. So you're kind of incorporating, your recommendation, assigning responsibility, time frame. You can even put measures on there, to feather it out. So these are just tools, approaches, techniques for you to consider. The more you use something like this that frames up your recommendations, and the clearer they are, the more professional it'll be, the more likely that they're going to be bought into, and probably higher the. So that's the analysis. And we've been talking about control. This is the part of the DMAIC that we have not dwelled on yet. This is the portion that comes at this phase. And it is a lot of people have kind of an idea what control is, but often this is fuzzy because it's not self-evident. And what we're really looking at is what are you going to do to the organization to recommend how they're going to evaluate the goodness of your recommendations, the benefits of that long term, and sustain the gains. What are you going to do to look at this process in 6 months or in 3 months? So you should recommend not only what they should be looking at, what measures, what metrics, but also who should be looking at it and at what time frame. And sometimes you come up and say, hey, at the floor level, at my level, at the day-to-day champion level, they ought to be looking at this stuff like daily, right? They ought to be looking at the number of hours that's happening, we do on inventory. That needs to be done, by the steward. This one needs to be done here at the commander or the chief or the office chief level, maybe monthly or once a quarter. So sometimes your recommendations for what they need to look at is then broken down by segments. In other words, here's something that needs to happen at the shop floor, level. Here's maybe what the leadership needs to look at, and maybe the commander, or the CEO need to look at it on a quarterly basis, whatever that might be, or by exception. In other words, when something's going wrong with you. So you frame up your recommendations, what you're going to measure. So what do you look at? A lot of times, what you developed in the measure phase, those charts, like the Pareto charts, like the information where you showed where the problems are, you may want to recommend in your control phase for the metrics, hey, why don't you use that same chart? We looked at reasons for defects or lateness or cost. And if you remember that Pareto chart, it had a tall pole and say, this is the main reason. And we had like 25 instances of those. You might recommend in the control phase, hey, look at that chart again in about 3 months, and we hopefully will see those reasons get shorter. There should either disappear or be a lot less of them, okay? And that might be something you recommend in the control phase as a measure to look at whether you actually are achieving the results. You may look and say, hey, we did a survey with our customers or with the users, the people that were working with this process. We recommend maybe in 3 months go back and redo that and see how well they think this recommendation using this template or changing this process, is that still getting to the mark? So a lot of things that you developed in the measure phase then should be the things that you also include in the control phase. And there may be other things you do. So you think about reviews, who should be doing the reviews, and what they should look like. Okay. Does that make sense to you? Any questions about that? Any other comments?
That makes sense to me, Professor.
Excuse me, I'm looking at some of the chat flow right here. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So this should be a slide, guys, in your thing. In this one, it says control. What are you recommending? So put in there, what are you reviews? What are you going to be recommending? You can do, and say, hey, we recommend, slide 22, will be used again. Or if you want to, make a picture of that slide, say, hey, this is our thing. Or we looked at our value stream map and we saw our non-value added time was X amount, and we anticipate that we will have a much shorter time frame because we eliminated steps. And we think that's going to get something you should evaluate. So that's the intent of the control phase in order to have this. So for a lot of times, I find teams struggle with this because it's kind of a, what does this really mean? What does that look like? And so I want to be able to talk about that when we go through in our mentoring session. What are you actually recommending? What's the frequency of it? Is there any distinguishing things between levels in the organization? And so this is important. And it's also the follow-on. And the other thing about control, I find, particularly those organizations that have ISO, like Megan, you guys are ISO, right?
Yes, sir. We have ISO.
Yeah, ISO. Yeah, and do you have an audit component where you guys somebody goes through and checks your processes and seeing if you're doing them and whether
Yes,
there's any
sir.
change?
We do internal audits. So we do those twice a year, and then we also do external audits. So we have auditors come in once a year, and they audit all of our ISO, food safety, and environmental.
Yeah. Okay. Now, would you consider that a control measure?
Yes.
Yeah. 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 What Megan just described is inherent in ISO, is that if you are compliant to ISO or using ISO approaches, there is an audit component to ensure that you are, following this, that you are getting the anticipated gains from being ISO compliant. And so what's the frequency of the audit? What are they going to be looking at? Are we going to do a sampling of that type of thing? That's an example. It's inherent in ISO, but the concept would be very similar, that you could transplant over into the MAIC model, that you have some way of going back and evaluating things. So, great. Oh, by the way, for new members coming in, Megan's a good one to know. She works at Marker's Distillery, whiskey distillery, right?
Yes, sir. I work at Maker's Mark.
Yeah, Marker's MAIC. Yeah, no free samples to the faculty or the other members, though. All right.
I don't know.
Not yet. Okay. You need to do that to celebrate, though, right? Reasonably. Anybody other questions on control side of the house before I go into the closure side? Does this make sense to you, or you have any questions about your project, how this might flow out? Okay. All right. Well, hold your fire. We'll be talking about that when we go through this. Now, as I mentioned, in addition to the control phase, is that you need to put results into your project, and tangible and intangible. Here are some examples of that. It's important then, the things that you can measure, right? The amount of lead time we cut out, the X number of opportunities for error, how many deficiencies, we decreased it by X%. How much money that we anticipate, either cost reductions, cost savings, that we're going to get out of this, okay? So it's all those things tangible. Typically, you can measure them, right? You can put a number around it and say it's better than when we started. Okay, those are results. Those are good stuff. The intangible ones, and please don't miss this, because often these is what makes the tangible ones sellable, and that's what the people's attitudes are about this. Wow, we started doing this, and we're not working those 48-hour or 60-hour weeks anymore. We're working, only 50. And we're like really happy with that because we implemented that team's recommendations. And the morale went up, you know, or we, you know, showed an easier way to get something done and it was causing a lot of frustration by folks. Maybe it's better accountability. That one of the things that we had tools going out the back. People were really frustrated. They were walking around, couldn't find the tools. They spent a lot of time doing that, and they were blaming each other because they couldn't find it. They thought somebody else took their tools, for instance, and that caused a lot of friction. Okay, well, by cleaning up the tool sign-out procedures, maybe improving the accountability of those tools, people aren't walking around blaming everybody else for stealing their stuff. All right, and that was a kind of an intangible result. Okay. Our customers are happy, right? We decreased the number of defects we had. We've got a better product that goes out, and that was kind of an intangible result. So don't miss that. Those are the things that if you don't have, in other words, if people don't like what you implemented, in other words, you added more work to me with these checklists, I don't see the value of it. The likelihood of that continuing is what, right? It'd be like a frog. It's going to hop once and it's going to land on its tail end, and that's it. It's not going to go anywhere else. And so your recommendations, you want to ensure that they have that human component, which is probably the most difficult thing. Why are the people going to embrace your recommendations? Why is this going to make their job more easy? Why is it going to be a benefit to them? And maybe capture that. And sometimes it's just very informal. You can go through a survey, look at users, and get feedback, and do kind of a quick, down and dirty on that. Or often it's more informal. If you're in a smaller organization, particularly, hey, you like that? On the scale of 1 to 10, what would you tell me? Using this new procedure, what do you think? It's a 4. Okay, why? Blah blah blah. Those are intangibles. Okay, maybe not qualitatively, statistically sound, but you're getting sound bites that you can reflect back on and tell the champion about this, because a lot of times this is what they're very much tuned to. They want to know how are people receiving this and what are the intangibles. Don't miss that. We talked about the ROI. I think all of you had your class. I'm not going to reiterate that, but that's, how do we figure out financially the return on investment of your recommendations? And then the other result is your champion feedback and acceptance. It's actually, a result because that tells you, do they accept this? Now, in the contracting world, that's a part of closure. Getting the champion to sign off on your project, to accept whatever you are recommending or whatever you are building, under this project. And so closure in the business world, in which many of you, because you're internal consultants, don't really kind of come to terms with that. But bringing your improvement project to closure, do they agree with and accept and sign off on in the consulting world? If you're doing this for money, like you're on hire, like what I do, you want the champion to sign off on that, because what's tied to that? Paycheck, right? You don't sign off, you don't get the money. Or you have to extend the contract to ensure that we meet whatever requirements. But so that typically is something you definitely want to get approval on. And because in the business world, if you're doing quality and doing quality for a price, you want the closure. But it's also a very good technique that we're recommending here, that even though we're doing this for the academic and school purposes, I even do it with the client that I'm working with on an ongoing basis, that we have the teams brief back the leadership council and have them approve of their recommendations. And then they will be the ones to say, okay, hey, you fulfilled the charter. We were going to disband the team at this point. You guys can go back and do your regular work, but we do it with improvement projects that are internal. And we have kind of we're on the part of the charter that we initially signed, we usually have the, director says, yeah, I accepted these things, or here's what we're going to do next. And we gather that. So it's just a good practice. Even though we're doing it in an academic environment, these are tools and techniques that are equally of value for you to consider in your future journeys. Okay, let's go back to where we are in the charts. And as I told you, I'm going to stay on time here. Closure is the other component of this, and that is, again, from the project management world. In our construct is that we want you to tell in your final presentation what lessons you may have learned as a team. Not only back academically, but there are things that you discovered as a team that you want to share with your champion, okay? When we collected this data, we realized there's no means to do this because there's nothing that ever was existing like that. This is something we learned the hard way, okay, that you're not collecting data. We recommend, okay, for future teams, they take a look at this and then continue to use this data collection method. Or we learned that, you know, we can't do a survey here because the IT department takes 6 weeks to get approval to put anything on the intranet. And so we had this survey. We ended up doing it, you know, through paper, but it would have been much more effective if we could put it on SurveyMonkey, put in this, but you can't get through the IT department unless you get 6 weeks, you know, advance notice. So that may be a lessons learned, okay? And whenever you do a project in the real world, that's the type of stuff you want to capture. In your briefing, you want to have a slide with that type of stuff in there. Not only would maybe a benefit to the champion, but what did you learn through your educational process? So you may have 2 audiences, one for the champion and one for me, when you talk about what you learned as a team. But I want you to have that reflection. Transition strategy. Again, that is how do you transfer this team, right? You guys are the, you know, you're the quarterback, right? You've been, you know, moving this team forward. Now you're about to hand that football off to somebody else, right? You're going to take this project, hand it back over to the organization. And for many of you students that are the sponsors in your organization, the football never left you, but you got it completely now without the rest of the team. And so you want to be sure that you just have that transition. People are identified, that you brief them up, that, hey, they don't know how to do a Pareto chart. Maybe you sit down with them, give them the template, be sure they understand that. That's what we're talking about in transition, and that's what we talk about in real life. And a lot of times when I work with teams, sometimes in black belt type of operations, they may be using Minitab or something other sophisticated. And a lot of times that's not what they have. So we always try to develop things in the measure phase, use the same tools that they have in the organization. So when we transition it back, they can continue to do that. And then the other thing, this is a very important one, and I've talked to some of the teams already. What, based on your recommendations, can you use out of this project maybe in some other part of the organization? Hey, this is equally applicable in the HR department as it is in contracting. Maybe we can use this in our other warehousing operations that, you know, we thought about. Maybe the contractors can use this. So whatever the implications that you can see where you can use what you learned in your project, maybe the tools you use in the project, maybe use a DMAIC model to improve a project and some other things. Your recommendation, hey, we saw this work, we got results, we recommend it. When we have future problems like this, we use the DMAIC model, for instance. That's sometimes, I've seen that in teams recommend that we have a common problem-solving technique that we recommend that you use in the organization. Or we went through this, you know, we had really kind of struggled about strategic plan. We thought maybe another area you may be able to improve is your strategic planning process. So think about different ways you can make recommendations to the organization. So we're at the end, just about. Summary. I want to know if any of you got any problems that you may be thinking are showstoppers, whether it's internal to your team or with your champion or meeting your timelines I laid out to do the briefing and get back with me to for the schedule I've outlined. So anything that has to do with the assignments, your team, or this, if you will, either contact me after this course or send me an email. We'll set up a time to coordinate, discuss. As I mentioned to you, I cannot emphasize the importance for you to practice, go through your briefing, time yourself, listen to each other. Just don't say, here's what I'm going to talk about, but actually go through it, listen to each other, provide constructive criticism, because if you're at that high level, high performing level of team dynamics, you should be able to give each other feedback, critique, and be better for it. You know, feedback is the breakfast of champions, and constructive criticism. So do that before you do your final briefing, because I'm looking for a polished product. When you do that, don't try to practice while you do your final briefing. I'm not going to be happy. The other thing is then, we mentioned the briefing the champions, and I want you also at the end of this to rejoice in the journey that you've done and take great good pride. So, any other further questions? That's it that I have for you tonight. So, what questions or comments do you have?
I would just like to say congratulations to everyone. We're so close. So good job, everyone.
Felicia, right?
Yep, that was me.
Okay, thanks. Okay. All right. So let me ask a quick question. What do you need to do as a team at this point? Anybody remember?
Mentoring session, senior champion sign off, mentoring session.
Okay, that's Nick. Roger that. Okay. So schedule up your mentoring sessions. Get the dates in. Okay. I need to get you guys queued up. You need to send me your evaluation, that slide deck. Okay. You need to before you do mentoring session 1, but quite frankly, if you can send it to me as soon as you can, like over this weekend, if you don't have it already, or if you already have it ready, I've already got some teams, that'd be great. What you're missing, what you need to work on. And then, what else do we have?
Two DQs.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, let me know if there's any showstoppers. Good, right. Let me see, any other comments? As I said, I'm going to keep it short tonight because you won last week. You've had a double header this week, and so let me see if there's anything else from you. So, DeCarlo, do you have anything? Okay. Danelle?
No, sir, I'm good.
Good, thanks. Good to hear you. Danelle?
Nothing, sir.
Great. Edgar, how about you?
Just thinking of going to the store, buying some Maker's Mark and running some personal quality tests to ensure that it is a good product.
Good to see you're in quality control.
It is, I promise. We test it 9 times before it goes out the door.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Felicia, anything else?
No, not anymore. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, great. And Dave?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay. Cameron?
No, sir, I'm good.
All right. Hey, Ivy.
Hi there. I'm good. Thank you, Professor.
Okay. Jay?
Professor, he doesn't have a mic. He's in Guam, and he's using a government computer.
Guam?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the life of an Air Force guy, huh? All right. Okay, let me send Nancy things. Okay, Megan?
No, sir, I'm good.
Okay, and okay, Nick?
Fine here, thank you.
All right, Ron?
I'm good to go, thank you.
All right, Sam?
I'm good, thanks.
All right. As I mentioned, this is the last time you'll have a gathering in a large group with your extended family. So thank you guys. Appreciate this, working with your cohort, and look forward to meeting you in our mentoring sessions. Good night, everyone. I'll stay on if anybody has any questions.
Night, sir.
Thank you, Professor. Have a nice evening.
Professor, I do have one question.
Yeah, Meg.
We had met with our champion about a couple weeks ago, and we gave him the recommendations. But we were going to meet with him again today, but Elaine, for some reason, she didn't show up, and we don't know why. We've tried to reach out to her, and we can't get a hold of her because we get those recorded and everything for Matt. And then, so I guess my question is, we've already met with him and I've sent him the approval. Is that okay? Because we kind of already gave him the full-blown presentation before we did our first mentoring session.
Okay. Was there, did you do the financial part with him, the ROI and that type of thing?
Yes, sir.
Okay, right. And what was his reaction to?
He seemed like he really approved of the recommendations. The only thing was he didn't understand the civilian vendor part. And I had Judy can explain it a lot better than I can, and so she was going to explain that to him today about that position. But Elaine never hopped on at 12 o'clock, so we couldn't get that explained to him.
Yeah. Okay. Now, has he filled out that form, the MS4 doc?
He has not filled out the form yet. I just sent it to him. And we were going to go over it with him today and tell him, you know, what we actually needed. So we didn't know now if it would just be best to have our first mentoring session and then try to reach back out to him again and give him the whole presentation again, or just update him again about the recommendations and how he needs to sign off on them.
Yeah, I would probably say if you briefed him already, and sometimes though when you write up this recommendation, you know, they pause a little bit and think about other things they may have questions on. So let me just say from the school's perspective, because the ideal situation is what I laid out. Now, reality is what you guys are living, right?
Right.
So it's acceptable as long as the feedback that we see isn't, you know, or it's negative. In other words, the champion says, I'm not accepting any of these things. I don't think they did a good job or something. Then that causes me pause, and well, I would have to, you know, maybe check with the champion and check with the team and work that stuff out. So
Okay.
my recommendations to you, get the written feedback, and he may have questions like this, because I think that's good that if you got somebody, you know, where you sit down and explain to him what the recommendation is, and it's me what the recommendations are.
Yes.
And so sometimes I'm a good kind of sounding board, even when you're talking back with him. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, he seemed really on board with them. He was just a little leery of the wording for civilian vendor. And so Judy was explaining it to us about how they kind of have that in their process, and so that she would be able to explain it to him where he would be able to understand it better.
Okay.
So I just didn't know if it was okay, because I mean we had met like 2 weeks ago before this class started, and like did the full-blown presentation with him and showed him the ROI and the payback time and everything else.
Okay. All right. From the school's perspective, as long as you get comments that you can put into the slides and then get that written one, you'll be good to go.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, sir.
You bet. Have a good evening.
You too.
Uh-huh.
Hey, Professor.
Yes.
Hey, Matt McKinney here from one of these transfer students.
Yeah.
Just want to let you know that I ended up getting online. I landed around 8 o'clock, so I missed like the first 15 minutes or so, but I caught the majority of your lesson.
Okay. I record this. We actually have of which let me